Hey, well, first of all, thank you, Evie and Sharon, and all of our speakers. I feel like I am so inspired, and I am uh, a teacher who has made a living as an actor on camera and a stunt woman, among other things. And I utilized all of my work in every aspect for commercials, for headshots, networking, marketing, and for performance. Um, and in my eventual move from a Stanislavski based approach to interweaving Michael Chekhov's work, I observed that many of my teachers were teaching just the additions, I could say, that Chekhov gifted to the acting field, and were neglecting to connect Michael Chekhov's work to Stanislavski, which left the Chekhov technique sort of a basket full of amazing exercises without the fundamental context for framing them. And so I really focus on merging these two processes. And I can say one of the interviews that I did on documenting this process over my life was an interview with Anatoly Smolyansky, who was speaking about Michael Chekhov and Stanislavski in relation to the limitations that Sharon Carnegie has spoken and written so in depth about. Uh, of how the work traveled actually out into the world and what Stanislavski was able to do under the repressive Soviet regime. And he said that Chekhov was Stanislavski as Stanislavski would have liked to have been but couldn't be. And so, just kind of bridging that work, if you would go to the next slide, in this slide, it's the old image of the Stanislavski system, and there are so many elements of the Stanislavski system that Chekhov includes in his work. And I just want to focus a little bit today on this center point, the spine, where it says mind and will and feeling. And I'm so grateful today. We've had multiple discussions and quotes really about the life of the human spirit of the role. And and ultimately I want to focus in on the nature of the what in Chekhov language we would call thinking, feeling, and willing aspect of the actor, of the character, the differences between them, and how that manifests in a role, developing a role, and the evolution of the role over the character arc, and a- and how to utilize gesture and other techniques in order to be able to generate a working plan for the actor who can then shoot out of sequence in any process. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. In this next slide, what you'll see is an evolution of a chart that Michael Chekhov drew for my colleague Mala Powers, who was the executor of Michael Chekhov's estate, and she was the beautiful Roxanne de Jose Ferrer Cyrano de Bergerac. She was a colleague of Sharon Carnegie's as well. And this is an evolution of the chart, and you'll see on the as I look at it, the upper left corner, tempo and rhythm that we've just been speaking about. You'll see composition, and you'll see the word synth analysis and TPT under that. TPT meaning triplicity, polarity, and transformation, three laws of composition. You'll see on this chart the many different elements that have been spoken of today: the atmosphere, the objective. Under focal point here on the left side of the chart, we're also considering the circles of concentration and elements of the psychophysical world. So the lower bar across the bottom are the psychophysical exercises, which essentially are like the scales of the vocalist or the bar of the ballerina. They include the energy pattern of contracting and expanding, moving according to degrees of resistance, utilizing the images of earth, water, air, and light, and archetypal gestures which activate the will force and take our verbs and turn them into physical motion. And all of that is done with this energy component, the radiant sphere of our energy field. So Chekhov carried very much forward all our opening comments about the power of radiation. This was essential to his technique. The fundamental approach for Chekhov here is to train the body, to drill the body on a regular basis, to be able to move through this entire range of motion physically, but not just physically, but to be able to move through that range of motion in the thinking forces, the feeling forces, the willing forces, and to move energy by opening and closing the energy. This is the most basic pattern of all creation. So ultimately, one could look at the entire arc of a character and identify how expanded or contracted they are in their physiology and in their psychology. And we can also look at the atmosphere, the vibration and of the space that unites us, which serves as the soul of the story, unites us with the audience. It also can be very contracted or very expanded so that the actor can track where they are in relationship to the atmosphere, the character is in relation to the atmosphere. And in the same way that we experienced this sense of, Darren was talking about the inner and outer, perhaps contrasting tempo rhythm, we can also have atmosphere contrasting with the inner world of the actor. And all of this can be tracked or scaled literally according to how expanded or contracted that makes it, as well as the sound of the voice in terms of volume, etc. And it could be put on a scale, literally a 0 to 10 scale, for example. So you could score your entire arc of your character and code it onto your script. If you're lucky enough to get an entire copy of your full script, or you can apply it just to the section that you have. So I used this system for projects as short as 30-second commercials, which had multiple scenes within the commercials to track the story that was very cinematic, for example, in a United Way Rape Crisis Center. So it had me perfectly walking through a parking lot and then being attacked, and then in the hospital recovering, and then a year later with counseling, being able to re-enter society. So it was the whole arc of a film within 30 seconds. And I could track everything. And of course, we shot um, out of sequence to do that. So we have that same kind of process of being able to drill as a training process, working with degrees of resistance and working with these fundamental gestures to push, to pull, to lift, to smash, gather, throw, all the basic patterns of movement. Expanding and contracting is what is happening, molding, flowing, flying, how it's happening, and then the gesture is why it's happening. When we train ourselves to be able to do this set of psychophysical exercises, we also are learning what Chekhov called veiling. And this is a process of dialing down or revealing how much of the information you want to convey. If we were lighting a stage, we could lower the power that goes into a into a lighting instrument if the light was too bright. If we were, for example, overacting, over lighting, we could turn the power down through the shorting, drawing back of the energy. And Mr. Chekhov said we don't ever actually want to decrease the energy. And this was referred to earlier. We actually need more energy to manage the subtleties so that we don't get exhausted like we were heard about in the Greek video. We want to be able to soften or gently decrease the effort and the expression by putting veils between without lowering the actual inner world. When we look at someone like Clint Eastwood, who really used the practice of intentionally developing his radiation, you can see he attains a kind of radiation power at where he becomes iconic in Dirty Harry. Up to that point, his inner radiation was not yet focused enough and concentrated enough and powerful enough to really travel. Once it became that, he had that force, then he became a global icon. And so all of these elements that were referred to, like radiation and receiving, can all be carried forward through the psychophysical process of training intensely. And all that training then is great for stage and is great for film. It becomes the difference between film and stage, then becomes a matter of veiling, a matter of style. And it includes drilling all the different tempo and rhythms regularly so that when, for example, you get into Darren's class, you've done a bunch of independent drills in order to be able to adapt to all the requirements that we meet on the set. Also, Chekhov adds into this over on the right side in the center what he calls the four brothers. And these are four qualities of beauty, ease, entirety, and form. I see them everywhere in Stanislavski, but not isolated so specifically. And those are trainings that you do as a life practice. When we spoke about yoga and things earlier in the day, we are talking about a life practice that allows you to manage your energy with grace and ease so that you can do the full out play like the baby, like Madison's baby. You can play fully. And through the feeling of beauty, and you develop a sense of acceptance. So you achieve that sense of free impulse with no judgment on your ability to express all these amazing images that will come into you. So I'd like to go to the next slide, please. For looking directly at this process of creating, I went to my colleagues who were graduates of the Shukin School, Dmitry Boudrin and Andrei Malayev Babel, who both gave me the Stanislavski system analysis plan, and I interwove Chekhov's technique with that. So in that, I got make a list of first impressions when you read the script, and we've transferred that into. And I do this as a solo actor. I do this as a director for my play, and we do it together as a cast and design team for a show. And I mentored 5 different films in Hollywood with the director, the cinematographer, and the assistant director and the production designers. Took them through this process for the film. So this first one is a film. Well, you might recognize it. There's a witch with a broom. There's a bunch of spirals. Maybe that is the Wizard of Oz. So this is images. Instead of just listing the images, we get the actors to draw them, and we get the actors to get up and physicalize what is drawn by anyone on the graph. After we read multiple times and let our images pour in, go to the next slide, please. Now we're going to be looking on this next slide. This is another show. This is called Grotesque Love Songs. As you can see, it's a very different set of images. This is done by one actor for her particular role. And the next one. Now we're looking at the themes. What is this story about? What is the scene about? What is the play about? And it's 1-2 word ideas, jamming, putting everything down on the paper, and then examining what are the uber or super themes that appear, and then asking ourselves, if this is what the play is about, what are we saying? If this is the story, what are we saying about this story? Next slide, please. We come to asking ourselves, what is the idea? The idea is what is being said about the themes. This is one that the cast came up with for our for Wizard of Oz. I think they chose your heart and mind can create both a tornado and a rainbow. And this starts to stimulate everybody to get them all on the same page. Next slide, please. Here is for the Grotesque Love Songs. The director's idea that they picked was shame prevents the music of love from being heard. We talked earlier about uniting our cast to get our story told, and these processes can be developed together, and then they are crafted into harmonious groupings, what some people might call a tableau. Chekhov called harmonious grouping, where everybody creates the form of an image, and they also create a call to action for the audience. What do I want the audience to do tomorrow because they heard and saw my story today? And all their decisions then come out of how can the story be told that will help get the audience to take an action. Next, please. This is a blank graph, and in this we have basically a location to look at what we could call the through action on the top line and the counter action on the bottom line, which we've spoken about. So we know all stories could, in their archetypal form, be the forces of good versus the forces of evil and how they collide. The graph has the top line, the higher up, the better, and the lower down, the worse. So we're going on the next scene, next slide. We've identified in the script 9 events in the story and one before the story opens, which causes the story to open on this day of all days and creates the situation under which the story begins. And we have a fantasy of what happens after the story ends. And we could call this for an individual actor, we can say, we can have a script, one score, and this particular score is an example of The Lion in Winter. And you notice the triplicity, there's 3, the beginning, the middle, the end. And in this case, the through line of good is not a particular person, but it's the value of honesty, with the idea that if we demonstrate genuine love, it will heal family dysfunction. And the evil line is lies and deceit destroy families. And deceit. So anything that moves truth forward gets placed higher up on the graph, and anything that engages in more deceit, the event goes lower on the graph. And this starts to reveal to us what our tempo, rhythm, and dynamics and intensities need to be. When it's higher on the graph or lower on the graph, they are the most intense moments. Next image, please. Here we have the Wizard of Oz, and the top graph is the overall director's, what we call synth analysis, that's synthesizing the analysis. for the whole story. And the bottom is for the role of Dorothy. Now, that's in Spanish. You might not be able to understand it there, but so I want to particularly look at the role of Dorothy. And in the role of Dorothy, we have, I'm going now to the concept of thinking, feeling, and willing as three elements of every psychology. And as we saw, was something of interest to both Stanislavski and Michael Chekhov. The evolution of the role of Dorothy here is moves her from a self-oriented, self-pitying orphan, relying on and demanding everybody attend to her going through a series of crises and challenges, which one challenges her will force and she grows with that. One challenges her feeling force and she grows through that. And one challenges her thinking force. So the Tin Man representing her feeling force, and the Scarecrow representing the thinking force because he wants a brain. Tin Man wants a heart. Lion wants courage, representing the will force. And her journey to wholeness, where when she returns home, she is willing to be a viable part of, and functional part of the family unit. Once the actor has this graph of where they are in the feeling of the whole, they can then go ahead to the next screen. This is just an outline here of each of the 9 events, and it has in it the essential atmosphere that connects each major event. Next one, please. And here is for love songs. This is the director's overall pattern. And the next one is for the actor. This is for the character of Romy. Instead of the atmospheres in between the 9 events, and her 9 events are completely different because her good is having her own home safely in love, and her evil is being abandoned and homeless. So this is where we really get into the juice of what I'd like to offer. The psychological gesture, which is a full-bodied physical expression with the power of radiation, the image of the character's body, and the gesture of the character's will force. You could say they're super task put into a physical action, a physical motion. And for this actress who created this, she was in a very big reach. She was really, really reaching as her main gesture. And by doing the big physical reach, she can kinesthetically activate that sensation, and then she can veil it so that it becomes as subtle as simply an inhale and or a palm just slightly exposed. And or on a long shot, it can be more unveiled, a little more physical. But the actor creates 3 gestures. One that expresses their worst nightmare. So this would be a reactive gesture, and it is her gesture of her nightmare of being fully abandoned and homeless, versus she creates another gesture, which is her expression of full winning what her goal is, her super task achieved. So super task totally failed, super task totally achieved, and the central core gesture, which is the way which she avoids her abandoned homelessness and achieves her home life safe love. There.
And Lisa, if you don't mind wrapping up in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
So one can craft these 3 movements to start with the abandoned homelessness through the reach to end in safe love, or back it. You can create a sequence, and you could freeze frame that and place it on any point in the graph. And if you aligned your scenes with each one of these, you would know in your psychological gesture exactly where you are in the whole arc of your story, allowing you to shoot in and out of sequence. And so that's the fundamental premise of this idea. Go ahead to the next frame. Here's just quickly the psychological gesture is a movement in one breath that has the thinking force of the character, the feeling force, and the will force of the character that has triplicity, polarity, and creates transformation. Next one. I'll pause there. We won't run this. This is an example of moving through that entire process. So, what an actor can do as a rehearsal process at home or every day before they go to the set is they can actually create a psychological gesture for each of the main points, and they can rehearse it in flow and in sequence. And they can create what Chekhov calls a score of emotional content so that they can do a very quick run through rather mechanically, but prep their body, loosen and oil their body to go through all the major emotions very technically, so that when they get into the actual moment, they'll be able to imagine and trigger through their concentration in the moment with the character or in the imaginative counter forces, be able to respond quickly. So in the Stanislavski world, we sometimes we use a statement that says, "I want to," you know, despite, and so that we were having a conversation about that earlier. And the suggestion is to practice gesturable verbs. So we could take the push, and we could take the what was the reel in to
Ladies and
reel
gentlemen,
yeah, to reel in the character and literally physically try that and then imagine it. So we can transform all the verbs into gesturable verbs that can charge your dynamics. Thank
Great.
you.